I'm Tracey Osborne, and you're listening to the Daring Woman podcast. Imagine the story of a generation being altered by women who were empowered to live their truth and in turn can empower others to live theirs. It's time to rewrite the narrative. All right, so today we are talking with Charmaine Hammond, and she has quite the story of surviving a near-death accident. So we're going to hear a little bit about that and how we can learn from something that traumatic and that scary, and how we can take that experience and really make it, something powerful to transform our lives. So Charmaine, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I so appreciate the opportunity to be on with you today.
I'm excited to talk to you. So let's talk about your story and, tell us a little bit about what happened.
Sure. Well, the sailboat accident story goes back quite a number of years. My then boyfriend, Christopher, and I were out sailing on a lake in Canada, and it was on our catamaran. It was a beautiful sailing day, just absolutely beautiful. And I was relatively new to the world of sailing, although Christopher had had a sailboat before he owned a car, so he had lots of experience. And the sailboat flipped, which is in catamaran sailing not a big deal. In fact, Christopher often used to go out onto the lake and flip the boat for fun. And I had just never flipped on a boat before, Tracey, and we were going really super fast when the boat flipped. And that was not the bigger deal of the whole day on the lake. What happened after that is once we righted the boat, which means we sort of pulled the catamaran back out of the water and we were attempting to get back on, I couldn't actually get on the boat, and the boat took off with me dragging behind it. And we were in a huge lake. I know. I said some words other than what you just said.
I can imagine. I probably would have been saying those myself.
Yeah, and Christopher did everything he could to try and grab the boat, but the wind was so strong that the boat took off with me sailing behind it. And it was absolutely terrifying. And to the world on land, it looked like everything was fine, that these people who were out on the sailboat were still out on the sailboat. And it was quite terrifying. And with about an hour later, I could hear splashing to my right. And Christopher, instead of swimming to shore, actually followed my cries for help and met up with me in this very big lake, 7 miles across, 23 miles long, and because he didn't want us to be alone. And so we made the first of many critical decisions, the first being that we decided to swim back to shore, which was about 4.5 miles.
Oh, that was a nice little workout for you.
It was a little workout. And partway through the swim back, Chris became pretty hypothermic and started losing consciousness. And he wanted me to leave him there so that I could continue swimming to get help. And we did have life jackets on, but no wetsuits. And I didn't want to leave him. And as you can imagine, I've already been alone once in that lake that day. I didn't want to be alone a second time. And then Chris said, when we get back on shore, Char, we've got a wedding to plan. And apparently I turned into this Olympic swimmer. The promise of a wedding.
Right.
But
get Chris up and walk on water after that.
I pretty much did. For Chris, we'd been together quite some time by then, and Chris knew that he didn't have much time left. He was very hypothermic and in and out of consciousness, and didn't want me to see something traumatic. And so he did keep his commitment, though, Tracey. A year later, we were married. And it's now been 22 years of bliss. But that day in the lake, continues to be such an anchor for me in so many ways in my life and in business.
Wow. So for me, number one, I have a strong fear of open water. My husband loves to tease me about it because he was like, Chris, he you know, grew up on the boat before he even knew how to drive a car. So for him, being on the water is like nothing.
Right.
For me, it's what's down there, what's going to eat me. I can't see it, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Watched Jaws way too many times as a child. So I mean, I would have had so many different fears, I think, going through me, being dragged by a catamaran through the water. Oh my God. You know, so how did that affect you afterwards? You know, I'm sure that's got to be pretty traumatic.
Yeah, it was very traumatic. And I think, you know, the one point I forgot to say that actually added to the trauma is when I was dragged away, which was probably about a mile or so from where Chris was, further out into the lake. At that point, the boat and I became separated. So here I was sort of bobbing around in the water. The boat continues sailing on, looking to the world like it's fine. And Chris didn't know whether I was on the boat. I mean, you can't see a mile when you're in the water. And
Sure.
so he had no idea whether I was with the boat or not, but something sort of told him to keep swimming towards where I was. And thank goodness he did that. But there were so many things that were going on, specifically in that first hour, Tracey, when I was on my own and the boat had become, you know, detached from me. And I noticed that when I had thoughts going through my head of despair, so, you know, oh my gosh, what if I don't make it? What if Chris doesn't make it? Who's going to feed the dog tonight? When did I last talk to mom and dad? When I had these feelings of fear and despair, my physical ability to swim was reduced. It was like my arms became so heavy and I would swim and not move anywhere. Right. And yet when I would change my thought process, you know, to think about, we are going to get to shore, darn it, I have a wedding to plan. You know, I got a ring to pick out. Oh, we are going to get to shore. We are going to get connected here in the water or on the beach and get this wedding planning going. My physical ability to swim became so different. I mean, I felt stronger. I could move through the water. I felt like I was making progress. I was in control of my thoughts. And that was one of my biggest learnings, Tracey, was that what we think about in our mind shapes what happens next. But the work when we're in fear mode, and I mean, we don't have to live through a sailboat accident to be in fear mode. There's lots of things that happen in our day-to-day life that are scary for us. Change, for example, scary for a lot of people. And, you know, when we go into fear mode, it affects our actions. It affects how we communicate with people. It affects how we show up in the world. So that was one of my biggest learnings. And the other learning for me was that as a professional speaker, I have been speaking about resilience for many, many years prior to this incident. And I learned that we can have all the right skills and tools in our toolbox, because my toolbox was really full. And my background was working in the area of resilience, and I taught other people how to be resilient. And yet that day in the lake, all those tools in my toolbox sort of went out the window. And that was the second learning, that whatever the tools are that we have to cope with life, we've got to use them. We've got to practice them.
Yeah, absolutely. It really puts to test just how prepared we are mentally for, you know, any type of an emergency.
Exactly.
There was a day a couple of years ago, I'd gone down the street to the store and got out of my car. I was in the parking lot and I heard somebody holler. And I looked across the street and there was a woman sitting in a truck and a guy was leaning in. They were yelling and fighting, and it really looked like, you know, it was some kind of an abuse situation or something like that. And I froze. I absolutely froze up. Instead of saying something, hollering, doing something, I just was like, what do I do? And so I went into the store, you know, because I wasn't going to be there for very long. Went into the store. I wasn't even in there for probably 2 or 3 minutes. And I, you know, told myself, okay, as soon as I come out, if it's still going on, I'm going to go say something. And when I came out, they were gone. And so I was left wondering, okay, well, you know, is she okay? What happened? You know, is he going to kill her? Is he going to hurt her? You know, what happened? And so what, what I'm getting at is that I can be, I thought I was prepared for something like that, given my past, given my history with domestic abuse and that kind of thing, thinking, okay, I'm not going to be one of those silent people. If I see it happening, I'm going to step up and I'm going to say something. And when it came down to it, I totally choked. So yeah, so we can think we're prepared all we want, but the real test is what happens when it actually is happening live.
Yes, exactly.
So, how did you recover from this? I mean, I would imagine that mentally afterward, after any kind of a trauma like that, there's flashbacks, there's nightmares, there's fears, there's, all of that. How did you go through and move through that healing process?
You're right. There are nightmares and fear and anxiety that come up. And Chris and I experienced a very similar day, an incident on the lake, yet we coped with it entirely different. When we got our sailboat back the next day, the police found our sailboat across the lake and brought it home to us. And the next day, Chris got on the sailboat and I didn't. I was paralyzed by fear. And it took me 7 years to get my courage up to go back on the sailboat. And this was so profound for me. I remember thinking, wow, we both experienced something very similar. No two people's experiences are exactly the same, but we experienced the same incident. And yet how we coped was so different. And so it was actually, believe it or not, my dog that I inspired some courage from. My dog had a fear he was a water dog, a Chesapeake Bay Retriever, but terrified of diving off the dock into the water. And so I was watching him. He would run to the edge of the dock and stop and sometimes fall in because he was running so fast he couldn't brake enough. And I remember thinking, wow, he's got the same fear I do. He doesn't want to jump into the water and I don't want to be in the water. And so I kind of made a private deal with myself. If we can teach Toby to dive, then I'm going to get on this stupid sailboat again. Because and I call it a stupid sailboat because that happens to us, doesn't it? And fear, fear kind of turns to anger a lot. And so with that, Toby very quickly learned how to dive off the end of the dock, and I kept my deal with the dog and got on the sailboat. But, one of the learnings was that sometimes what we have to do is educate ourselves. So while I was really educated on resilience, I was not educated on sailboat safety and what to do in these situations. And I relied on Chris. And so Chris said, part of me getting back on the sailboat meant I needed to get out there and practice flipping the boat and practice getting on the boat and do man overboards and all of those things that would build my confidence, but also my skill set. And that was really, really powerful. 2 years later, after I finally got on the sailboat, we also won a sailboat, came in second place at a sailboat regatta. And so that was kind of cool. It was just a little regatta, but it was big to me.
Hey, and small wins are big wins.
That's so true. I love that. Small wins are big wins. So yeah, it was learning and practicing to build confidence was something that was really important. But also having to learn how to reframe things, because I knew that as soon as I would get on the sailboat and I would go into fear mode and think, what if the boat's going to flip? What if the boat's going to flip? We actually do things that could actually cause the boat to flip. We are not present. We make errors. So I realized that the other learning is I needed to really focus on what thoughts I allowed to take up space in my head.
Wow. So you're better than me because I don't think I'd have ever gotten back on the boat. Mostly given my fear of water, which is funny because like my totem animal is an orca, and I am just fascinated with sharks. I absolutely think they are the most magnificent creatures, but you will never catch me near one. So, but I love that you were able to, really extract the lessons from this trauma. And, instead of wallowing in this, oh my God, I almost died. I could have died. What, Chris could have died. We all could have died. What could it, instead of wallowing in that, it sounds like you really were able to kind of look within and say, okay, what can I learn from this that I can use to grow and to, help other people.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And it wasn't necessarily easy work. I mean, boy, it is. It's hard work, isn't it? It's hard work, and it requires us to be present. But, one of the things that Chris said, and I think it was a bit of a turning point, just prior to the dog learning to dive off the dock, Chris said to me, we bought this sailboat because we wanted to have fun together. Mm-hmm. And this isn't fun, me sailing on my own. And he said, I'm thinking of selling the boat, and I'll just get something smaller that I can just do on my own. And everything sort of flashed. I thought, man, 7 years I have let fear get in the way of doing something that Christopher and I used to enjoy together. 7 years. Like, how did I lose 7 years to this fear? Wow. And that really helped me change perspective. But I also knew every time I got back on that boat, I really disliked it. There was this association that I couldn't shake, that this boat meant something bad would happen. So we actually sold that boat and bought a different one. A catamaran, but a different sailboat. It looked different. It sailed differently. And that's what it took for me to, shake this completely. And I have to be honest, even many years later, when I get on a sailboat, there's that immediate sort of a deep breath. I want to breathe deeply, and this fear just takes over. And then I can exhale and say, hang on a second, Charmaine. You've practiced. You've mm-hmm. learned how to sail. You've captained the boat on your own. You can do this. And so that thought process just takes so much work. Our instincts seem to take over before our logic does.
So I like the point that you brought up, that there was just too much associated with the original boat. Mm-hmm. And when we go through a trauma, we attach memories to, or we attach emotions to houses, to, whatever, to things. And so I like the fact that you realized that in order to move past and move forward through this fear and leave that behind, you just needed to get a different boat. Mm-hmm. It wasn't necessarily the fear of getting on a boat. It was the fear of getting on that boat.
Exactly.
Yeah. So all you needed to do was just get a different boat. And I think that's a huge lesson. It's like, you fall off the horse, you got to get back on the horse, but sometimes you just have to get a different horse.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, that's awesome. So, what are some last little tidbits that you can give our daring women out there who are listening, who are still stuck in fear, regardless of whatever it is, but they're just kind of stuck in that what if I fail? What if I, try it and I fall off the horse?
Right. I think one of the things we can do is, I love how you said the what if, because that is what happens in our brain when we experience fear. What if this happens? What if that happens? And we're actually fearing an outcome that may never occur. And so just replacing the sentence, instead of what if this happens, the sentence could sound something like, what will happen when I get through this? What will life look like when this is all okay? And so it's about changing the language that we use. But also, one of the things that can really help is focus on what you have control over. So when tough things are going on for daring women, it seems like a lot of things are out of our control. And if you can hang on to what is within your control, my reactions, how I deal with my emotions, how I see the situation. Those are things that we can actually have a lot of influence or control over, and put the energy there instead of the what if scenarios. And the last piece is to give yourself credit. Somebody said to me after the sailboat accident, how come you didn't trust yourself, Char? Oh, and when they said it, it felt like I'd sort of been, kicked in the knees. And I thought, oh, that question just hit me. why didn't I trust myself? They said, Charmaine, you had years of crisis training. You'd been on a boat before. Why didn't you trust that you could make good decisions and get through this okay? And I thought to myself, wow, isn't that true? Sometimes when difficult things happen in our life, we don't trust that we know enough to get through it, or that we have the right supports or the right people in our life, or that we know what to do. And so I really started to focus on trusting myself more.
That right there is huge, is that we have to put the trust in ourselves before we can put the trust in anything else.
Yeah, it was huge.
That's I'm pondering that question myself, why didn't you trust yourself? It's like, I don't know. I don't know. That's a really deep philosophical question there. That's, I think, at any point in our lives, we all should kind of sit and just reflect. Do I trust myself? And, do I truly feel that I'm capable of handling X, Y, Z? And if not, why? What can I do?
Yeah.
What do I need to learn? What skills do I need to have? What support system do I need to have in place? I think by focusing on that, and really diving through that is a good stepping off point for overcoming anything.
Yes, absolutely.
Wow. Awesome. This has been wonderful. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story. I'm glad that it resulted in a wedding for you.
And 21 years of bliss and 2 lost wedding rings in that lake. Can you imagine? We lost 2 wedding rings in that lake, but we are happily married and, continue to work on growing ourselves individually and as a couple. Awesome. So thank you so much.
And what an interesting proposal story, right? Well, how did you get proposed to? Well, you see, we were about to drown, and
exactly. Oh my goodness. Thank you so much for having me on, Tracey.
Ladies, as always, thank you so much for coming on and listening to us. I am so grateful for every single one of you out there that is joined in, that is listening. Make sure you come join us in our Daring Women community. It is a safe haven. It is our sanctuary to come, kick back, let our hair down, and talk about whatever it is that we need to talk about. And know that it is a safe place. There is no judgment. There is no hate. There is just nothing but pure love and support from all the other members. So you can find us over on facebook.com/groups/Daring Women. We'll see you there, and we will talk to you on next week's episode. Thanks, everybody.